are so glad that you are here joining us. You're in for a very special treat as we are talking about probably one of the most essential parenting skills that you can have in your toolbox, boundaries. I know for me, with boundaries, probably a lot of you guys, is we want to establish those boundaries. And the most important boundary for me, I set with my kids, you cannot touch my French fries. That's it. Said, don't touch my French fries. So that way when you get in the car, they all want to get in your bag and grab your French fries. So, but anyhow, this is such a great tool to have. And not only, regardless of what age your kids are, from toddlers, teenagers, even adult kids. This is a fantastic tool because it's so easy when we think about it in our heads. How hard can it be to set boundaries? And then our kids push back on us. We're like, hey, what do I do now on it? And that's one of the hardest things, but boundaries is one of those things that frees us so much in our relationship, and something that as you get more and more into learning how to establish boundaries, I guarantee you it's going to make your parenting life so much easier, bring so much more peace and harmony. But the greatest thing about boundaries is you're going to set up your kids for success. So tonight you have some worksheets on your table, and you have a bucket on there, and I'm so excited for Sarah Bentz to be here. She's one of my most favorite counselors right here in our area, and she's going to be sharing with us how to establish boundaries, but it's going to be very much a tool that you can use. You have the worksheets. Then also, at the end of her presentation, we're going to be taking some questions. So as we are going along, just write those questions down, and then you're going to have the opportunity to ask Sarah about whatever it is about boundaries or any parenting questions. Then also on the table, you had some workshops that she has available at her Hope and Growth Center. All excellent, so make sure that you look at those and take those, and if that's something you want to go deeper with, feel free to make sure you can take those with you. Anyhow, let's get going. Let's introduce Sarah Bentz. She is the founder of the Hope and Growth Center and one of the most phenomenal counselors we have here in North Fort Worth. Give her a warm welcome.
Thank you. I get to talk about two of my very favorite subjects tonight, parenting and boundaries. So thank you for letting me come and be a part of that, and to just give you just a tiny bit. You know, when we talk about boundaries, as you see, I have a workshop. It's 4 hours in parenting and boundaries. I'm going to give you 40 minutes. So we were going to condense as much as we can, but I'm going to give you as much as I can. I am a mom of 3 kids. They're all adults, and I also have 5 grandchildren and 1 on the way. So boundaries, I'm just going to tell you up front, we don't all get it right all the time. I had my little granddaughter the other day, and I thought afterwards, like, you didn't use any of the skills you're going to share. But we all have grace for that, and I'm just going to give you just a little bit of what would be appropriate in a boundary. So we're going to start with, what is a boundary? A boundary is a construct of identity. So they appear to be external because we reinforce them with setting limits. If you buy a piece of property out in no man's land, you can't just put a house on property, right? You have to know where that property line is. So you have to have surveyors come. They mark it, right? They have spray paint or little lines to make sure you only build on what belongs to you inside that property. So it's external because we have to make it external. We can't set our limits until we know our limits. Like, we can't set the house there. We can't put a fence up until we know where that line is. It's important that we know where the line is. It's important as parents that we make sure our kids know where that line is. When we're unclear, they're going to go over the line. They're going to push the line, right? And we have to reinforce the line, but we'll talk more about that. We can't know our limits until we know ourselves. I can't say that enough for parents. you have to know who you are and what you can bring to your children, what you bring to your home, right? Because if you don't know, like I know I don't stay up late at night. Like I'm done at 9. I had to teach my kids that if they needed my help, I'm available from this time to this time. I'm not available after 9 o'clock, even if that's when you start your homework, right? I'm not available. But they knew that, right? I had to tell them this is where the lines are. But you have to know who you are in order to set those lines for your kids. Boundaries are define an entity, and boundaries are interwoven spiritually, physically, intellectually, and emotionally. It's all woven into one. And it's really important that you understand that boundaries not just rules, right? And you're going to hear this often tonight. It's not about the rules. It's about, and we'll talk about your bucket in just a second. So before we get started, you all received a little bucket paper. And what I want you to do in that bucket, I want you to write down all the things that you believe as a parent belong to you. They're probably the things you stress about. They're probably the things that you stay up late at night about, all the things. I want you just to write. I'm going to give you just a minute to kind of throw down some ideas about what that looks like. And don't worry, I'm not going to call anybody out on this because we're going to flip it over when we're over, and you're going to put down what does belong in that bucket. So as a parent, what belongs to you? What are your responsibilities as a parent? Okay, about 10 more seconds. Okay, you can continue writing. I'm going to continue talking. I look at everyone as a bucket. We have a slogan, I use it often, not in my bucket. And the reason why we use a bucket is because the bucket represents you. Like each one of you have a bucket. It is what belongs in your bucket fits perfectly in your bucket. As a parent, what belongs to you as a parent fits perfectly in your bucket. Your kids' stuff doesn't go in your bucket. Your stuff goes in your bucket, and we'll talk more about that. But that everyone has a bucket. So today we're going to talk about the law of sowing and reaping. I have the coolest bucket. I ordered this on eBay. It's from 1940 in a fire department in New York City. It's a pretty cool bucket, right? And I got it because I love buckets. But I also got it because it represents the rescue bucket. As parents, sometimes we want to rescue our kids. Today, we're going to talk about the law of sowing and reaping. Because you should not be reaping what your kids sowed. You're supposed to reap what you sow, not what your kids sow. So the rescue bucket is important to understand is that this isn't the bucket we want, right? This isn't what we desire to have. What we desire to have is a bucket like this, right? You have your own individual bucket, and we have individual buckets for kids too, because things belong to them, developmentally appropriate, of course, but they belong to them. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. So there are two kinds of consequences. We look at the psychological relational consequences. That's us getting angry, that's yelling, using guilt messages, nagging, withdrawing love, all those things. That's the psychological part. I don't know how far you get with that when you use that, but we don't get very far, right? Because our kids learn that all they have to worry about is mom and dad getting mad at me. They never learn that what belongs to them goes in their bucket, right? Because parents just get angry. And so if you think about someone that has a bad grade, they shouldn't be worried about what parents think about what their grade is. They should be worried about, I really disappointed myself because I didn't study and I didn't do the things, instead of, oh my gosh, my parents are going to get so mad. That's the opposite of what we want them to do, because we want them to be responsible humans, right? And that belongs in their bucket. Versus the reality consequences. Those are pain and loss. Those are the things that they got a bad grade. That's their consequence for not studying, right? Is it going to kill them? No. Should we rescue them from that? Should we be the ones that call teachers and say, oh, I can't believe they did this. Is there anything we can do to get that grade up? Whose grade is it? Their grade. They have to learn the loss of having that bad grade. Yelling, screaming, nagging, yeah, I'm not sure that actually works, does it? Because actually that puts it in your bucket. You're rescuing them so they never have to learn that responsibility. All they have to do is avoid you from yelling at them. They never learn the consequence. Your yelling at them is not a consequence. All right. The consequences. So this is what consequences do. They transfer the responsibility to the child from the parent. When you think about what belongs in your bucket, what belongs in your bucket is allowing your child to reap the consequence of their decisions, the things that they have decided to do. You should not be reaping that. It takes so that it all goes on them and not on you. Dr. Landreth up at UNT, he's the guru of play therapy, and he says to use a phrase, and he says it's when you choose, such as when you choose not to pick up your clothes, you choose not to have clean clothes, or you choose not to watch TV, or you choose not to play with your iPad or whatever. When you choose, or when you choose to pick up your clothes, you choose to watch TV. So you're putting all the choice into their bucket. You're not coming up with it. Do we need to get angry with them about that if they choose? Nope. We don't need to get angry about that. He shares a story in his video, and he says that his daughters were arguing in the car, and he told them, he says, if you choose to continue, you choose not to have TV. Well, they only had 30 minutes of TV. So he says they started up and ended and started and stopped and started and stopped, and they got to the street of their house, and they straightened up, and they were so quiet. And he says, oh, girls, I think you believe that because we're on the street and you're now quiet, that you choose to watch TV today. But the minute you chose to continue arguing was the minute you chose to not watch TV. There was no anger, right? It was that was it. And he says, and wouldn't you believe they chose to not watch TV for 5 days in a row, right? But it puts it all on them. We don't have to be angry with it. We just have to follow through with what they chose. Consequences makes it the child's problem. Once again, it's about them. How are they going to figure this out? They come home with a bad grade. So what's the plan, guys? Right? We're going to talk about what's the plan for your how are you going to bring up that grade? It goes on them. It doesn't go on you. So some questions you can ask yourself when we fall into, does this belong in my bucket or does it not belong in my bucket, is whose problem is this? So we're going to say, if your child's name is involved, it's probably your child, right? Their grade, their whatever, that it probably belongs to their child. What can I do to help my child experience the problem? Let them have the consequence, right? What am I doing to keep my child from experiencing the problem? See, so many times we rescue, right? We're like, oh, it's so hard. I had this dad one time. Very annoying. My son had done something. I have no idea what he did. But he was invited to a birthday party, and I said, you chose to do this. You chose not to go to the party. So he called his friend and told him he wouldn't be able to go to the party. The dad showed up at my house. He had the audacity to show up at my house and try to convince me to let my son go, because it wasn't fair to his kids that my kid wasn't showing up. And I thought, you don't know who you're talking to, because the more he talked, the more I was like, I am not doing this, right? Because I was like, what in the world? You're a grown man. What's wrong with you? But he couldn't handle the fact that his kids were having to have a consequence too. And by the way, I do believe the consequence was something that happened at his house. So it should have been, his kids probably should have been in trouble too. But the consequence has to be, you have to know, you have to decide what that looks like for your kids. All right. So more consequences. Right? Here we go. So we're going to do another activity, and this is more about what kind of boundaries we want to have for our kids, right? So each of you have a paper, 2 papers. You have a color paper and a white paper. Do not turn it over yet. The color paper is the paper we're going to do first. So when I say go, you're going to turn the paper over and you're going to circle number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, until I say stop. We're going to see how many numbers you get circled. Okay? Ready? Go. Okay, stop. What's some numbers that you got to? 9? 5? 9? Okay. When I say go, you're going to turn over the white piece of paper. In the corner, it's divided into 4 sections. Number 1 is in the first box, number 2 is in the second box, number 3 is in the third box, and number 4 is in the fourth box. And then you start back up where number 1 is, where there's 5. And it keeps going in that pattern. All right, go. Okay, stop. How far did you get? It's a little higher this time. What's the difference? You had some boundaries, didn't you? You knew exactly what was expected of you and how to do it. And that's what a boundary looks like. When we are clear with our kids about what we expect of them, and as long as it's developmentally appropriate, when we understand that and we give them clear instructions, then we can guarantee that it's okay that we follow through with a consequence if they don't follow those clear instructions, right? But it's really frustrating when we say things like, be good. What does that mean? Or be nice. What does that mean? It sounds like you got to be a doormat, is what it sounds like. And that's a whole other story, right? You have to make things really clear. When I was a preschool director, I used to get the kids that threw pea gravel all the time. So these little boys would get mad on the playground and they'd throw pea gravel at each other. And one of the things I said to them, I said, what happened? What's going on? You know, we're not supposed to do this. And, well, I got mad. And I said, well, did you say you were mad? No. But the problem is that we tell kids to be nice. As soon as they say, I'm mad, or that makes me mad, we say, be nice, right? We give mixed messages. So instead, they throw pea gravel, which is a whole lot more dangerous, right? So giving them permission to say, I'm mad, but let's not throw the pea gravel, was very, very clear, rather than saying, just be nice, right? But as soon as we hear a tone, we're like, calm down, calm down. It's okay that they have feelings. They just can't hurt people with their feelings. So when we give choices instead of trying to control, as your kids get older, and I'm kind of looking around guessing how old people's kids are, but as kids get older, it becomes harder and harder not to control, right? Because the stakes get higher as they get older. And so we want to control everything. So we put everything in our bucket with rules, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have rules, but we put too much in our bucket and it doesn't give them that choice that they need. And I have to remind parents this every day. Every single day, God gives me and gives each of you freedom to choose what we're going to do. We have to live with our decision, but He gives us that freedom, and then He gives us grace. And that's what God expects from us as parents, is to give them that freedom within lines, right? So that when they get to be adults, they know where their lines are. That's the whole purpose. So children want to do things their way. They also want things to go well for them. Parents also want things to go well for their children, but they want children to do the right thing. As a parent, our job is to make sure the kids don't get both of those things, right? It becomes harder as they get older to come up with enough consequences. Sometimes they're natural consequences. Our son, we did not buy our children cars. We felt that was a responsibility that we were not going to purchase for them. They were going to have to purchase a car. We allowed them to drive our cars, and when we had rules, when they drove, we paid for car insurance, but if they got a ticket, they were going to pay for their own ticket. They were going to show up to teen court. I was not showing up to teen court, and they were going to have to call the insurance company. It was going to be all on them. And so our son decided he absolutely, positively had to have his own car. So he bought this hunk of junk car that went past inspection. So he found out that he could go down someplace on Jacksboro Highway, and he could hand the guy $20 extra, and he would pass him. So he hauled down to Jacksboro Highway and did this, unbeknownst to me, by the way. My husband and I did not know anything about this until afterwards. And on the way home, he got a speeding ticket on 820. He passed inspection, but he got a speeding ticket. And we had already set those boundaries. Like, you're going to do these things. You're going to have to pay for it, all the things. And it was funny because my husband tells me that he got the speeding ticket. And I said, okay, well, he knows what he has to do. And my husband's like, I can't believe you're not mad at him. I said, he knows what he has to do. It's not that you haven't ever gotten a speeding ticket. I mean, this is just normal. We just have to take care of the consequence of getting a speeding ticket. So when I asked my son about it later, I said, so what happened? What did you learn from this? And he says, well, first of all, being dishonest is not the right answer. I said, well, good. So you got a double consequence that day because you were being dishonest and did something you shouldn't have done. He had to learn that, right? He had to be the one that paid that. I couldn't rescue him from all that responsibility. If you choose to drive, you choose to have these responsibilities. I'm not going to go around and make sure you take care of everything. This belonged to him. So it's real important that we understand that they have the big picture and we're giving it to them. The freedom, so there's a freedom equals responsibility equals consequences equals love. I'm going to say it backwards. Loving your kids to the point of making sure that there are consequences teaches responsibility. Responsibility gives freedom. Freedom is earned with responsibility, right? But if you just throw something at them and expect them to understand how to handle every single thing, they're not going to. And they have to learn the consequence of that. So give freedom, require responsibility. When I taught preschool, I could get 2- and 3-year-olds to clear their table and pick up toys and put it in the right bin and all the things. And parents were like, how did you do that? Oh, well, I expected them to do that. We said, this is the bin for this, and this is the bin. Oh, that's not where that goes. It goes over here, right? We expected them to take that responsibility. It was developmentally appropriate for them to do that. And as they got older, you just add more responsibility to the things that is required of them. And render the consequence. If you take the consequence away from them, you are stealing from your children. I can't say that enough. You are stealing. You're stealing what belongs to them, the consequence. And trust me, my children, they all had consequences, and there were things that I wanted to steal from them. There were things that I wanted to take away for them not to experience. If you give the idea of, you think about, when you've set a clear boundary, let's say you as a family are going to go to Six Flags. But in order to go to Six Flags, we got to have, the lawn needs to be mowed, the dishes need to be done, laundry needs to be put away, and we got to have our homework done. These are the requirements to get to Six Flags. And most of the family is doing all the requirements, but there's one. There's one. And now we're going to say they're teenagers, right? There's one kid. And you remind them one time. And then you realize they're not doing it again. They didn't get up. And now you've reminded them again. And you've reminded them. And now you're getting mad. And now you're hauling in all the other, but now we all have to do this work. So everybody chips in for the person that didn't do their job, and everybody gets to go to Six Flags. Now, it's a miserable time, right? Because mom's mad because she's told them 1,000 times. Dad's mad because he had no plans of mowing the lawn that day. So we now know it's everyone paid for one person's decision not to follow through. Now, we could do it a different way, right? We could have said, okay, we're going to Six Flags. If you choose to do your work, you choose to go to Six Flags, we're going to leave at this time. If you need help, let us know. If somebody would like to help you, that's different, right? When they didn't do it, you chose to stay home from Six Flags. But it breaks our heart because we're supposed to do this as a family. We're supposed to be all doing these things as a family. But one person of the family decided they didn't want to be part of the family that day, right? So they needed to stay home. The consequence was for them to stay home. We can't rescue them from it seems harsh, right? But guess what? There's a whole lot bigger things as they get older that are going to be decisions. They're going to know, is there a consequence to this or maybe not? Allow your children to suffer from the consequences now while it doesn't cost them like it does in adulthood. They need to learn it now, the big ones, like missing out on going to Six Flags. The whole family shouldn't have to suffer for that. All right, some other thoughts on consequences. So the consequence needs to meet the crime, right? You don't do the work, you don't get to go to Six Flags. You didn't do your homework, you get a 0 on your paper. And what's the plan? What are you going to do about it? Not every offense is punishable. Not every offense is punishable, right? There's some things that just need to be reminders. But we also need to be mindful of some of the choices that they make, that if we allow this one to not be punishable, if you will, is it going to create a character flaw? Like somebody always blaming somebody else for what they're doing, right? So I remember I had these cousins. Every time my cousins did some awful thing, my aunt would say, "Oh, it's just a phase." Well, guess what? They're terrible humans today as adults because, I guess it's just a phase. And they blamed everyone else for what was happening with them. That's a character flaw, right? So we can't come up with, or it's just the friends that they keep, right? If they weren't hanging out with them, whose decision was it? Our kids, right? They're the ones that made those decisions, not the kids. Those kids said something too or did something, but it's really horning in on the fact that we can't. Those are punishable, right? When it might create a character flaw. Respond immediately, especially for the younger kids. Like they're not going to remember why they're getting punished 3 hours later, but they'll remember it right away. Teenagers, yeah, let them sweat. That's fine. Avoid emotional consequences, getting angry. We don't want them to make decisions because you're angry with them. We want them to make the decisions because it's the right decision. It's the best thing for them. When your feelings are affected directly, it's okay to use like an I statement, like, I'm really hurt because you came to the table and started yelling at everyone. That's an I statement. That is something you can say, right? It's not saying, you're not projecting anger onto them and calling them names or whatever. You're just saying, that was really hurtful. You came to the table and you were rude, and you can go sit in your room while the rest of us eat supper, right? Boundaries are always to protect, and sometimes that means yourself and the rest of the family, right? If you have one kiddo that is unruly of some sort, it's okay to separate. It's okay to have them, we get so hung up on, you have to have family dinner. And yes, I agree with that. We do. But sometimes we also have to make sure everyone in the family is being taken care of and protected. Give the freedom to choose and freedom to experience the consequence of that choice. So when they choose, then they choose the consequence. We don't have to be angry about it. We might be disappointed. I'm sorry you chose that. I'm sorry you chose to not go to Six Flags. That really stinks. Check in with your child before assuming you know what is behind their choices. Little kids in particular, their brains don't think like ours. Oh, teenagers' brains do not think like ours, right? They're a little foggy sometimes. And so sometimes we have to check in like, what was going on? Before we yell and scream and throw out consequences, what was happening? And maybe if we can follow what they were doing, our response may be a little bit different. Still consequence, but at least you understand where they're coming from by checking in with them. All right. So what's in your bucket? When we look at what belongs to you as a parent, this is the flip side of the bucket page. What belongs to you and what belongs to your kids? What are you sowing? What have you been sowing? What have you been reaping? Something that they've sowed. And what do you need to take out of your bucket? Put that on your paper. Cross off the things that don't belong in your bucket, because we all put stuff in our bucket that don't belong there. I think I did miss one slide, and so I'm going to just tell you what's on the slide. One of the things that is learning that their emotions can't go in your bucket. It's okay for you to be able to feel alongside them, but you can't feel their feelings. When you start feeling your child's feelings, remember their brains are not fully developed. They don't see the big picture. When you put that in your bucket, everything gets murky, right? Everything doesn't look the same. And we base our decisions on that murkiness, right? It's not clear. So when we put their feelings in our bucket, it taints the bucket, so we don't make the right decisions for our kids. Those consequences are really important. The boundary is knowing who you are, knowing what belongs to you. The consequences, you're aiding in the consequences, but you shouldn't be reaping the consequence. You shouldn't be rescuing, taking things out of their bucket, because kids are irresponsible, because they're kids, and they're going to be irresponsible. And your job is to teach them, give them those clear lines that help you, for them to see what belongs to them. I used a lot of, here we go, rescuing. Poor boundaries, stepping in and taking over for irresponsible people. Obviously, those are your children. Doing for your children what they can do for themselves. So you think about developmentally appropriate things, is that if the teacher says, this is the thing that I hear parents say all the time is, well, that teacher, I don't know how she thinks that they're going to be able to do these things. Obviously they can, because she's required it. She knows developmentally this is appropriate for this age. The kids just have to do it, right? We have to know, we have to make sure that they know that they can do this. Instead of them complaining, this is too hard or whatever it is, that they come up with their excuses. It's important that that you're not doing something for them. I do a workshop on ADHD, and inevitably I'll say one of the things is not to do their kids' work. And all the parents are like, oh, that's so hard. Because, by the end of the evening, you have an ADHD kid, they're jumping around and running and all sorts of stuff. And to calm down to do homework is torture. So it's easier for parents just to kind of fit in. They have to learn this belongs to them, not for us to do it for them. When helping doesn't encourage growth, those three questions that we asked on that other slide, really important questions, right? Because we have to know that if we're going to put it in our bucket, we have to make sure that it's going to make that our kids, it promotes growth in them and doesn't take away responsibility. Feeling for them instead of with them, stealing consequences from your children by making things better for them. We just can't make it better for them. Sometimes they have to fall, and it's okay for them to fall. And I know we don't live in an area where falling is something we do very well, especially for our children. But you want them to learn now, not when they get to college, that there are things that they are responsible for, and they have to fall in those moments. So when we think about the rescue bucket and reap what we sow, it's like the key to boundaries. Because when we understand what belongs in our bucket, it works. It is the key to all boundaries, is to know what belongs to us and what doesn't belong to us. And so hopefully today, you will have learned a little bit about boundaries. If you haven't read The Boundaries with Kids by Cloud and Townsend, really, really good book, or the boundary book in general, this general boundaries. I've read this book a million times. It is a really, really good book. So I would highly suggest all of those books. Questions?
All right, let's give it up for Sarah. That was awesome. I took so many notes. Thank you. That was so good. Hey, we want to open it up for questions, and whatever questions you have, opportunity to have an amazing person who knows boundaries so well to help us. So anyone have any questions to ask? Yes.
Sorry, there was a lot of good content there, especially in the slides as I was reading it. I was trying to get all this stuff down. I didn't know if you guys were going to be able to provide those slides maybe to all those that registered to that email, if you could do that. But for small children, you know that they can be the most troublesome because they don't really have that thought process of, for instance, eating. If I don't eat, I don't survive. And establishing those boundaries, do you think it's, acceptable to set a time limit? Not saying, you're acknowledging, yes, you go to sleep hungry, but establishing a time limit where the food's off the table and then that would be an acceptable consequence? Or do you have another option that would be available for that?
I think it's very appropriate that that they understand that this is mealtime and we sit and we eat meal. Developmentally, if you're talking about a 2 or 3-year-old, they can sit at the table for maybe 3 minutes, right? So they eat a little bit differently. But if you're talking, elementary school, they can sit at the table and eat, absolutely. And if they're not well, now you have to make sure that there's not some other issue, right? That if they're just stalling for stalling's sake. I know a lot of kids that have autism. Eating is a big issue. So I wouldn't want you to have the same rules for them. But yeah, I think if that's what you decide at your house is appropriate, absolutely, they can learn to do that. They do at school, right? Or they don't eat.
I also, piggybacking on that, we have 2 little kids, 5 and 2.5, so we're in the thick of it. Eating issue, similar issues with that, but also just in life, knowing what consequence to give to match what he did wrong is just challenging for me. Sometimes I don't know, how do you match without being too extreme, or I guess, is there a scale to go off of, or when they're 5?
Sure.
What's
The younger they are, the shorter period of time that you're going to give some kind of a consequence, right? So if you're talking if you choose to pick up your clothes, you choose to go play outside. Mm-hmm. If you choose to ignore your clothes, you choose to sit for a little while, right? If you choose to hit your sister, you're choosing to sit out. Mm-hmm. If you choose to love your sister, you're choosing to play with your sister. It very simple things that doesn't have to be big, right? It could be very simple. It's got to hit the heart, though. Yeah. Unfortunately.
Because timeouts only do so much after a while. You're kind of okay, 5 more minutes. And you're oh, this isn't doing anything. But like you said, looking at what they did wrong, or like simple little things, as opposed to this big giant today was horrible or whatever.
Yeah, no, it doesn't need to be big. The smaller it is, the better, right? Yeah. And it has to be immediate.
Gotcha.
So, if the consequences aren't immediate, then they totally forgot that they didn't do something, or, yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, what about that strong-willed child that just bulldozes right over every boundary you sit? And how do you respond back to that one who you give a consequence to, they don't care. And they just keep, whatever you set, they just keep going right through it. What's your feedback on that?
I think that with a strong-willed child, one of the things I would encourage is to just continue, because what happens is they're strong, so they're butting against you, and guess what? They're moving that boundary, right, every time. And then the next day, you think the boundary's back here, but you've allowed it to be moved here because you're exhausted, usually, right? So keeping that line where it's supposed to be, like you chose to do it. Yeah, they're gonna fuss and they're not gonna like it, but sticking to that boundary is the best thing you can do with them. I think the other thing is that to know yourself, like I said earlier. If you don't know yourself, you don't know where your limit is, right? So if you're expecting something big, you're exhausted, they're exhausted, everybody's hungry, right? You have to think all of those things in mind when you do that. There's a book called No Drama Discipline, and that's one of the things that they talk about in that book is know your own strength and your own weakness before you set that boundary, right? If you're gonna die on the hill, you better make sure you know what you're dying on the hill for. So I think with the strong-willed child, you need to know for yourself where that limit's gonna be too.
I'd like to bounce a very specific scenario because this has been an area of contention for our family every morning in regards to our 10-year-old son and him getting to the bus. He clearly needs to be at the bus stop by 6:40. There isn't an option for us to take him later. We've exhausted all the things that we can potentially think of. What would you recommend?
Has he missed the bus?
He has, and Dad had to, because we don't want truancy issues, because it seems like he would go down that route of you miss the bus. I mean, he loves school, though, so it's a really hard place for us to figure out where are we rescuing him from versus us going that extra mile of now we have to take him to school.
Yeah, the consequence is his, right? If he misses school, he has to make up school.
Right, but we're not there to take care of him, right? So then that's
And
what I'm
he's
saying.
10.
Our limit is he needs to get on the bus at 6:40, and so that's why I'm like, okay, what other?
How far do you live
option-
from school?
It's really close, but because of the traffic, it takes 20 minutes.
Does he have to go over a major road?
Yeah, he can't walk
Okay.
at all.
I was gonna say, yeah, I would.
Yeah, no,
But,
the bus
um,
is the
yeah,
only option.
I mean, those are hard, and maybe the consequence will have to be something later.
Right.
Right? You know, it may be in that situation because of safety issues.
Right.
The consequences, if you choose to dawdle, I mean, if that's what's happening.
Yeah.
If he's choosing to dawdle, he chooses not to play with the PlayStation, right? You lose your PlayStation for the rest of the week.
Right.
Or whatever is keeping him from being there on time? Like, is there something that actually is
He's a
keeping him?
daydreamer.
I'm sorry?
Daydreaming. He's our thinker. He's creating
Okay.
things in his head.
Okay. So does he go to his room and get ready and come back, or he doesn't come back?
He's got his bathroom in his room, so he is there for 30, 40 minutes. He's got the alarm to wake him up, and he
Right.
snoozes. He's only 10, so we want to solve this now.
Right. No. Yeah, I think I would say that the consequence will have, because he's 10, it can definitely be later on in the day, right? When he chooses to dawdle and ignore his alarm, then he's choosing these other things later on. You could turn it around too, like he could earn something as well. And so that if every day he gets on the bus on time, he earns something.
Yeah, a lot of it's been very short-lived. Dad does a lot of the earn thing, and it's just enough, and then he'll go right back. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So that's part of why we're like, we've chosen a lot of different ways to address it, but I think the consequence later in the day might be another thing
Yeah.
we'll have to revisit. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
This is the husband. So, same kid. When he teases his younger brother, you know, yes, I want to be calm, but I struggle with that. Are there any techniques, and you know, like, is there anything that I can do to not, you know, get angry? Because it's at the moment, it's when I'm dropping him to the bus stop, and you know, and we're running late, and he's teasing his brother, and just you know, spirals. So the question is, what can I do? And how, like, knowing myself,
Right.
I get angry pretty easily with that, in that situation. He's teasing his younger brother, all of that. How do I cope with that?
So I would suggest, so we tend to, as parents, want to police, right? We see the younger one being picked on, so we want to police, we want to come in and rescue, right? And in those situations, I would empower the younger sibling to stand up to his brother, right? And say, I didn't like that. That was not very nice. And allow him to give him words to use, right? So because you policing it doesn't change anything, but you giving your child that power to use those words, that belongs in your bucket to empower your children, right? So to empower them to use words, like give them, is it a girl or a boy that he picks on?
Boy.
A boy. Give him, he's not a baby, right?
No.
Okay.
7.
Okay, yeah, he can use words. Empower him to use words. Like, did you tell your brother you didn't like that? Give him those words. Oh, I heard your brother tell you he didn't like that, right? So you're not telling him directly, you're helping them to problem solve together.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
So, for, say, a 5-year-old with pretty significant ADHD, would you make the consequences and such like the same as you would for like an average 5-year-old that doesn't have any like sensory issues? Or I know you mentioned like autism, obviously that's a whole nother thing, but like that's what I struggle with, because I'm like, I know, because I grew up with the same thing, that it's a struggle for you to
Sure.
pay attention, to sit down and eat, and those things. So I guess would your consequences be a little different or lighter or for a child like that, or?
Okay, that's a whole class.
Yeah, and I seen this. Is this
Yes.
for, what age is this for, was my next
All
question.
ages.
Okay.
All ages. Yeah, please come. It's free.
Okay.
But to answer your question, it does look different. So you have to remind yourself that with ADHD, executive function is impaired, right? So how they reason looks very different. And in the evening, they have whirled themselves up. Earlier in the day, they're it looks different than in the evening, right? Especially if they've been to school or if they're on medication or anything like that. So in the evening, yeah, it looks a little bit different. So supper might look a little different. Like he might need to stand up while he eats.
Yeah, we did that for the first three and a half years of his life, and now he does sit down. He
Okay.
prefers to sit now,
Okay.
but he doesn't sit.
Yeah, he's
Is the
halfway off the
problem.
chair. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Or
I
he's
had one of
running
those.
in circles around the kitchen, literally.
Yeah, it does look different because their executive function is not the same, but he still has some consequences within what he can manage.
Okay, so still consequences, maybe they should get a little extra time, or maybe like space it out. Like, okay, you're
Right.
gonna come back in 5 minutes and eat type of
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have parents of teenagers in the house? Yes. We got to have questions when you have teenagers.
Not a teenager, but a preteen,
Oh.
11, ADHD boy. And we had a very specific issue just last week at school where he was essentially kind of caught up in bullying other kids. Now, my boy is very loving, very bright, very popular, and I've tried to impress upon him that, you know, although popularity is kind of feels great, with that comes great responsibility because your
Right.
friends, you're very influential to your friends. Without getting into specifics, he didn't do anything horrific, but he was being a bully, and he had some consequences through school, like he went to Saturday school. But what I'm struggling with is trying to get him to understand compassion and humility. You know, I'm proud that he's popular. I wasn't popular in school. I was just a number, and that's great for him, and I've told him as much, but you know, that he needs to really stop and think before he speaks or acts. But compassion and humility, I know that they're in there somewhere,
Yeah.
but trying to get him to express that and get his teachers to see that boy that I know is there at home. Any recommendations?
I think, first of all, he has to be the one that represents himself and represents himself well. With ADHD, if he's popular, it's what he does well, right? Because he struggles with other things. I can imagine. So it's kind of where his realm is, right? And he does have this kind heart, but he's going to have to learn the hard way because he has ADHD. I'm sorry. He's going to have to learn the hard way that being cruel to people, that people aren't going to find him attractive. That there's going to be people that are going to say, yeah, I don't want to be around you anymore because of that. And I would just keep promoting that kind of thought process is that, you have the power to walk away. You have that influence to show everybody else that we can be kind to other people. But he may have to learn the hard way because it's what he's excelling in right now, is to be that popular person. And that's hard.
Great answer on that. Sarah, one last question is, because I hear this often, is for that teen child, that teen kid, who, when you set boundaries with them, they can get pretty verbal back at you. And
Right.
as a parent, it gets exhausting. So then it just, what some practical tips that you can give some of the parents on how to stay strong with that?
So how to respond to the pushback?
Yes, how to respond to the pushback.
Okay. Well, with every boundary, the pushback doesn't have to be personal. And I think that with parents, that's what we do, is we make it personal because, they were our baby and now they're being little snots. And what are we going to do about this, right? And so to remind yourself who you are, you're the parent. This isn't personal. This is the most master manipulators you ever want to meet are teenagers, right? And they know exactly how to push, and making you feel bad by that push is how they're manipulating it, right? So learning that that's just part of who they are right now, that it doesn't have to be personal, will take that part out of your bucket, right? That belongs in their bucket. That pushback is exhausting. I know it's exhausting. And sometimes we just have to take time out, right? Say, all right, we're done with this conversation. I don't like to be talked to like that. And we're not gonna have this conversation until we can have it in a way that is respectful. When you choose to be respectful, I will have this conversation with you, but we're done. And stick to that. Now, I know they'll follow you through the house and be loud and all the things. get in the car, go for a ride. You don't have to be there, right? They're teenagers. You can leave them home. But just know where your limit is. Like, if you don't want to engage when you're exhausted, and just say, I'm not engaging. I'm tired tonight. We're not going to have this conversation. Setting those kind of boundaries, they won't like it. But if they think there's a chance they might get away with something, they might wait, right? Their pushback, remember, it doesn't go in your bucket. It's not about you. It's about remember that slide, it said, they want what they want, right? They want things their way. And our job is, because we're the parent, we see things bigger than them. Our job is to set those limits with them. And so I guess that's kind of what I would suggest with those parents. Just continue to set that limit, but just, you don't have to take abuse from your children. It is not necessary.
Share with us these 3 workshops that you have.
Oh, yes. So the one workshop is the Parenting ADHD workshop. It is at our office. It is free. You just have to email me, tell me you're coming. And we talk a lot about ADHD. I have 2 kids that have ADHD. I think all the men in our family have ADHD. But I give you a little bit idea about that. Not in my bucket. This is just a very small portion of boundaries with kids, right? The sowing and the reaping is just a small portion of boundaries with kids. So we actually have 2 2-hour, and they're not the same. They're 2 different workshops that, if you'd like to join me with those. And then we have an expressive art group for preteen girls. So they're not, I guess they're not preteen, but young teens, girls. That's coming up in March. I think that's it.
That's great. Hey, let's give it up for Sarah again. Thank you very much. That was awesome. Then also on the table, you have this paper that have a QR code. It's called Grace-Based Parenting. And this is an excellent small group that we're offering here during the 1045 service. This curriculum right here is amazing. If you have kids and you're just really wanting to figure out how do we raise these kids, like for the couple in the back right there, this is awesome stuff. What's so much fun for me in grace-based parenting is it incorporates a lot of this. But more on the side of what Christ did for us and how he parents us as our Heavenly Father, is knowing that this curriculum is really a reflection of grace. But also at the same time is we all want kids that love Jesus. That was Carrie and I, is we wanted more than anything for Michael, Hannah, and Zoe to love Jesus more than their dating life, more than their sports, more than whatever it may be, education. Because when you love Jesus, that's what's going to come out of your heart on that. And then being able to build those character and also have loving relationships. We all want a relationship with our kids when they leave home. And that's what grace-based parenting sets you up for as parents. So I want to encourage you to register for that class. It's going to be a phenomenal 8 weeks. Wes and Kim Holloway are leading that. And we also have free childcare for that. So it's something that you're not going to want to miss. Scan that QR code. You can register for that. Hey, thank you so much for being here. It's always an honor as parents, as we are trying to raise kids, the hardest job in the world on it. So thank you so much for your investment in becoming the parents that God wants us to be in raising up our kids. Let's pray and we'll go. Heavenly Father, again, thank you so much for life. Lord, thank you for the blessing of being mom and a dad. Lord, even though so many times it goes way above our heads, so many times we don't know what to say. But Lord, we just pray for your presence, for your spirit to speak mightily and allowing us to speak the truth and in love, Lord, to